All right, we are going to do a demo of a portrait painting, and we're going to start with drawing, and we're going to use the skull. Um, we're going to use a sphere, and this sphere represents the cranium, and we're going to divide the sphere into 5 sections from top to bottom. We're going to do that also side to side. We're just using small little pencil points to do that. You can double check with your fingers to make sure that you have 5 in each direction. You can also use your pencil to measure that. All right, sometimes we start with a cube first, but for the purposes of this painting, we want to use the sphere without the cube. We're going to come down 3 eye measurements. We're going to put an arc, and then we're going to take the 2 that are underneath that arc and add them below to find out where our chin is going to be. So we're really getting ourselves set up for proper proportions of a portrait. And once we get this set up, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add in the glabella because we're putting our skull in. We're putting our nasal bone. And we're putting our nasal cavity. This doesn't have to be perfect because you are going to paint over it. We're going to put our orbit in, which is a little bit bigger than the eye measurement that we initially placed in here. So we're using charcoal pencil on canvas panel right now. Here's our cheekbone, comes out a little bit, comes down to the bottom of the circle that we drew. And then we put an arc over here that helps us to see what we call the forehead or frontal bone. There we go. And then we'll redraw the side of the skull just so that it's nice and round. And then down here on the jaw, we're going to add in what we call the angle of the mandibula. And we're going to bring in an arc on either side and put flat lines over here to make a cylinder. And we'll put a line across to represent where the teeth or lips come together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put an arc that comes down on either side towards the base of the neck. This is our sternocleidomastoideus muscle. And then we're going to place down an arc that goes like this and extends out off the side of our canvas panel. And this is our trapezius, and then one more arc in here for our clavicles. So even if you are doing a portrait where the person's wearing a collar and you don't see the clavicles per se, they are underneath. We know they're there just like the skull, so we want to put them in. Now, above the orbit is our brow. So from the brow to the bottom of the nose is where our ears are going to be. And for the ears, we're going to simplify, just put an outer arc like this, an inside arc that kind of swings back in, and then a small arc at the bottom for the lobe. So again, an outer arc that curves out, an inner arc that starts in, curves out, and comes back in, and then a small curve at the bottom for the lobe. All right, the next thing we want to do is sort of block in our hair. So I'm just giving a basic outline as to where that's going to be defined. There we go. And that's what we're going to start with for our drawing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get in with our black and white mixture, and we're going to go right ahead and start to utilize black and white on our palette. And I have full color, by the way. I'm going to get some white and some black, and I'm just going to start to base a little bit of my mixture by mixing up a middle gray that's going to sort of represent some of my overall values. So I'm going to go ahead and block in my hair as one gray tone. And, you know, doing a value scale is a great way to understand the values that are available to you as you work in your painting. Here, what we're doing is we're just blocking in the overall value of one form, which is the hair. And we're treating it like a middle gray value. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the same kind of thing on the inside of our orbits. So we know the inside of our orbits are relatively, they're going back in space, they're hollow, so they tend to be in shadow. So we're going to go ahead and put that in. All right, and I'm not using a lot of water so that my brush is dry. Also, I'm using a brush that is fairly wide. I can't tell you the number of this brush because there's paint on it and it covers up the number, but I would say that it's like a number 5, number 6. So just by putting this little bit of gray helps us to see the overall shape of our skull. The next thing I'm going to do is mix up, I'm going to take more white, put it over here, and I have just a little bit of gray on my brush. That's just enough to separate the value from, this will be a lighter value from the gray that we initially set down. So even if we just start with this, and we go in here and we paint, and don't leave edges between this paint and the gray that you just painted. So paint right up to it, have the paint touch the other value that you just painted so that there's no white of the canvas underneath. All right, so now we're just draping this in. Perfect. And what we're trying to do is establish values that will represent, in painting terms, it will represent planes of the skull. So anything that we are painting, remember when you're painting with a brush, the tendency is to work massive. When you're drawing with a pencil, you're working linearly. So it's quite a switch to go from painting or from drawing into painting. Now, the cool thing about this, because I'm not using a lot of water, and I have that charcoal pencil drawing underneath, even though I'm painting this light value and covering up some of my pencil lines, I can see a ghost image of them. And that's going to help me as I go in and paint some of my values on top if I want to see where the structure is. So I'm going to bring this value down into the neck as well on one side, because we know the other side of the neck is going to be in shadow due to the fact that our light source is going to be coming from the right side. I'm going to go ahead and cover this all in. Now I'm just going to get a teeny bit of water because I noticed that my paint is getting a little sticky. Now, I've got my palette here. I'm going to dip into the black again, go back up into this gray, and add a little bit more black to this to get more of the gray that I started with. And I'm going to drape that in underneath my cheek. Now this shadow is actually going to continue up into my face. So remember, our light source is going to be coming from up here. So we're going to continue with this same gray value. So again, I'm still mixing the same gray value that we started with. And now I'm going to go ahead and paint over my ear. And I'm not using, now the gray that I have on my brush is mixing with the wet paint that is lighter. And that's okay, because it'll lighten it up just a little bit from the dark value that's in the hair, and it'll separate that just a little bit. I'm going to go right into the orbit as well. And we're going to bring some shadow down on this side of the nose, underside of the nose, getting a little bit more mixture. And I'm going to add a little bit more volume over here for the cheek. Even though we started with the skull, I'm going to add a little bit more volume for the cheek. I'm going to carry some shadow up into the nose here. I'm going to carry some shadow into the top lip. And then I'm going to carry a little bit of shadow underneath the bottom lip. And then, of course, we have some under the chin. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the white. And mind you, I haven't even really cleaned my brush off at this point. So when you're working with values like this, you can kind of go back and forth from the light to gray mixture, adding a little bit of white or black as you need it. And if you're monitoring, you can get away with not having to clean your brush off in between. Now I'm going to lighten up. So I'm going to get a little bit more white. I'm going to start with white by itself. There's already gray in my brush. I'm going to get a little bit more white. And that way, this is really going to look lighter than the other two. So I'm not using white out of the tube for my mixture. I'm still using a little gray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the top of the eyelid on both sides. And then I'm going to put a little bit of light right next to the iris. Because the eyeball itself is going to have a little bit of light on it. I'm also going to use this to bring down the light on the nose, the top of the nose. And I'm going to have a little bit of light on the top of the side plane of the nose where our nostril is. All right, still getting a little bit more of my lighter mixture. Going to hit this into our forehead, brow area, down the side of the face, into the ear. Now I'm going to carry this light mixture up, and I'm going to carry it right into the light of the eye. I'm going to do the same thing on this side because there's a little bit of a light hitting the cheek right here. And we're going to carry that right into the eye, the eyeball. We're going to go into that top lip, hit the chin, carry this up. And of course, this area right in here by the philtrum under the nose. And right on our cheek as well. Filled in the cheek on this side near the angle of the mandibula. Going to get a little bit more white in my mixture right here, because I want to come down on my sternocleidomastoideus and across my clavicle. Now, right now, we're going to leave the hair the way it is, but we will go on this side and darken it up a little bit. So we're getting a little bit more darker gray in the hair area. I just had to go to the water. I'm getting a little bit of the dark. I'm going to start by itself, even though there's still some light in my brush. I'm going to mix it in with that dark so that I can lay it and leave it and not get too many streaks on my canvas. I'm going to go back in with the same dark that I'm using and just sort of use the edge of my brush so it's flat, right? It's a flat bristle brush. So I'm going to turn it this way so that I can go in here and just kind of indicate a line at the top of the eyelid. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of dark in where my iris is. And as I'm doing that, I'm just being careful not to overdo it. I just want to get a little bit of that dark in where the iris is. That dark can also go onto the eyeball itself on the other side of the iris. I'm going to add some of that shadow under the nose because this is like a plane under here. I'm going to curve it up on the sides, carry some of that down into the philtrum. Into that top lip. You can see how the shadows are starting to form. And I'm going to add a little bit under here of this darker value and carry it down into the shadow on the neck. All right, carried that right down to the bottom. Now here's something that's really helpful. What we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of a darker tone on this side of our canvas. We'll get a little bit of water. And the reason why we want to do this is because it really helps the lighter values on this side of the face to appear lighter if you put a darker tone up here. So I'm just going to get a little bit more black on my palette. So I'm squeezing out a little bit more black. to mix from. And I'm not going to use too much white in my mixture because I really want this to create a contrast. Don't hang on to the edges, so let the paint go right up to the gray that's in the hair. Get rid of the white of the canvas. Do the same thing for the ear. Remember, anything that you cut into with your paintbrush, if you cut too much, like what I'm doing right now, you can always go back in and paint with other values and cover that up. Getting a little bit more white, or a little bit more water, sorry. There we go. So the water is something that, as you need to cover a big area like this, then you can go in, get a little bit more water, make the paint work a little bit smoother for you. So controlling the water is a big deal in painting, especially if you're trying to do a lot, like I am in a demo, in a short period of time. I'm trying to, get a lot of painting done, and if the paint is too wet, it's much harder to literally cover up what you just painted, so it's harder to do layers. You can always let your painting set for a bit and then come back to it if you have time. So we've got the darker value on this side. One of the things that I like to do now that I have that dark value on my brush is I'd like to go up here and add some brow. Now on the other side, I am going to add some white. So I'm going to go back to the original gray that we started with. And we'll add that on this side. So I might add a teeny bit more white to that so that it's a little bit lighter. So it's going to be more like the value that's in here. There we go. So you can see how it creates a contrast when it's painted right up next to the shadow value of our face and our neck. Don't hold on to edges. Paint right up to the paint that's on the neck and the face. You can hear the sound of my brush because it's a little drier. So therefore, just by pressing down a little bit harder, you can get that paint to really start to move around. There we go. So I'm just trying to cover up the background. And to tell you the truth, the sooner you can get rid of the white of the canvas, the better off you are in terms of being able to see what's happening in your portrait. So that's why we like to get rid of that background right about now in order to step back and really look at the values that we've chosen for our portrait. There you go. So I can see that the neck and cheek need to be brought up a little bit with a darker tone. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, the ear. And as I'm pressing down, I'm keeping my brush stroke light enough so that it almost just glides across the canvas. So you can't force this stuff. All right, so very light touch. Maintain a hard edge right here for your cast shadow. getting a little bit more dark value. I'm going to put the glabella in shadow right there, which is something I didn't do earlier. So my brush is not very wet. So as I drag it across, I'm not doing a ton of blending. I am able to get some of this darker paint that I'm putting down to lay on top of what's underneath. And I think that that can be a challenge for people that are just starting out with painting. So that's why I'm telling you guys, keep that water sparingly so that when you come in with your next layer, like I said, unless you have the luxury to come back to your painting and let it set up for a little bit. There you go. All right, we're gonna just go ahead and add a little bit more deeper shadow in here. I'm not going to the black right out of my tube. I'm sort of keeping it a dark gray. And now I'll go ahead and add a little darker value into the hair. Notice whenever I'm going in, I'm trying not to overwork the paint. So the strokes that I'm laying in are very, you know, like if I go like this, boom, then I turn it, and I'm using both sides of my brush because sometimes the mixture is slightly different on the other side of your brush. So double check that. Same thing when you're mixing on your palette, mix on this side, mix on that side, then bring it up to your canvas. All right, we're getting there. Now we're going to take some of the white, bring it back into our light mixture here. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit more white onto my palette. So that I can really add a nice lighter value to this painting. A little bit more white. Remember, I haven't even washed my brush off. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. It just means that I'm kind of used to knowing how much paint I need to add if I already have dark paint on my brush. So you'll figure that out as you're going along. I'm just tapping that onto the canvas, and it's not the white out of the tube. It's got some gray in there, but it's got a little bit of gray. So if I just sort of tap this, you can see how that starts to really pop. And you'll know if something doesn't look light enough, okay, I got to add some more white. And you'll start doing it. All right, I just switched brushes because I really want to get my values increased on the light end. So now I'm starting with a cleaner brush, and now I'm going in here, and this is really close to the white out of the tube with just a little bit of gray. So, you know, I'm still holding back. I'm gonna go in and grab some of that gray, but now my brush isn't saturated, so that I feel like I'll be able to see some of those values really come through a little bit better. Now you do have to paint with thicker paint as your canvas is still setting up. It's still wet. So those brush strokes are going to be a little bit more apparent because the paint is thicker. And I want some of the brush strokes to stay fresh. And then as I go into them, I'm starting on, you know, some of them are going to disappear because I'm doing a little bit of blending on the canvas. Notice I'm carrying some of these into the shadow. That's always fun to do. So sometimes you'll see a little bit of that depending on the lighting. All right. We're getting there. Looking good. I'm loving it. So much fun painting with black and white. Tap a little bit of that light into the eyeball. Sometimes you just see a teeny bit of light going across the bottom eyelid. Like a little edge right in there and right in there. All right, so I am very satisfied with everything. You know what I'm going to do is go back and get a little bit of gray because I know that there's a little bit of a triangle right here, and there's a little bit of a shadow right there. And that is formed because the muscle is coming here and coming here, and so there's a little bit of shadow in between. The supraclavicular fossa major and minor is what it's called. All right, we're going to end our demo, and I hope that you do some great painting.